Shalom, my friends. This is Rabbi Leynor. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Mishnah and Gemara, which make up together the Talmud. This is rabbinic scripture. The Mishnah is also called the Oral Law and was first written down around 200 CE. Basically, between 200 before the Common Era and 200 afterward, Tanaim, rememberers, I call them proto-rabbis, which Jesus was part of, would be giving their explanations about what was in the Torah. And these traditions were first passed down orally and then later written down. And this is probably one of the most formative parts of the development of rabbinic tradition. Their interpretation, of Scripture, and answer the question, what is the Torah actually saying? For an example, the Torah says to do things, but it doesn't explain how. A perfect example would be tefillin. It says to take these words, put them on your doorpost, put them on your body somewhere, and the rabbis had to figure out what that was because there was no explanation of how to do that. So most of the time the Mishnah deals with the things that the Torah is talking about. Until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, over 60 years ago, the Mishnah was believed to be the first written record of the oral law of the Jewish people, and now we have a collection of writings from the Qumran community. Those are the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, which probably also began as an oral law of that community. The story of the Mishnah is the story of a chain of Jewish teachers that lived between about 200 BCE through 200 CE. But really, we're going to deal here with the ones about 30 before the Common Era. Two of the first and great Jewish scholars were Hillel and Shammai. And I've told you before that Jews always study together in a chavruta. That's, two people at least, because it helps people focus. Because sometimes when you study things, you tend to get involved in your own interpretations and you drift away from what's basic and fundamental work. And their teachings, Hillel and Shammai's, are usually contrasted with each other and reflect their actual opposing schools of thought. They had disciples, just like Jesus, and they would argue with each other over interpretation. Over 300 differences of opinion between them appear in the Talmud, and in almost every case, Hillel's view prevails. Hillel was born to a wealthy family in Babylonia, but came to Jerusalem without the financial support of his family and supported himself as a woodcutter. One of Hillel's most famous sayings, recorded in Pirkei Avot, a tractate of the Mishnah called Ethics of the Fathers, is, "If I'm not for myself, then who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, then what am I? And if not now, when?" Rabbi Shammai was an engineer, and pretty much his occupation reflected in the strictness of his views. The Talmud has a story about a Gentile that came to Shammai and told him that he would convert to Judaism if Shammai could teach him the whole Torah in the time he could stand on one foot. Shammai drove him away with a builder's measuring stick. He went to Hillel and said the same thing, and Hillel said, "That which is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and study." The Gentile converted, and you probably noticed the similarity between Hillel's lesson to the Gentile and Jesus' later golden rule, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." I must point out the difference that in rabbinic thought it's the negative. What's hurtful to you, what is reprehensible to you, reprehensible behavior, don't do that to someone else. Other than because you could do something to somebody that that they like, and it may not be good for them, but they'll do it. So they're two different perspectives. Now, on his deathbed, Hillel the elder blessed the next teacher in the chain, Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakai, who was said to be the youngest and most distinguished disciple of Hillel, and the blessing was to become an Av L'Dorot, the father of generations. According to the tradition, midrash or folklore. Rabbi ben Zakai was a pacifist in Jerusalem in 68 of our era, CE, when Jerusalem was under siege by the Roman general Vespasian. And Jerusalem was controlled by the Zealots, who would rather die than surrender to Rome. And ben Zakai urged surrender, but the Zealots wouldn't hear of it. So Rabbi ben Zakai faked his own death and had his disciples smuggle him out of Jerusalem in a coffin. They carried the coffin to Vespasian's tent, where ben Zakai emerged from the coffin and told General Vespasian that he had a vision that Vespasian would soon become the new emperor. He then asked Vespasian to set aside a place in Yavne, near modern Rehovot in Israel, where he could move his yeshiva, his school, and study the Torah in peace. Vespasian promised that if the prophecy came true, he would grant his request. And of course, Vespasian became emperor and kept his word, and the school was established and continued to operate over the centuries. Now, when I lived in Jerusalem, I studied with Dr. Lee Levine, it's a noted archaeologist, where I learned the fact that Yavne was probably a POW camp for escapees from Jerusalem. And this was probably where ben Zakai found other rabbinic survivors and their students. So this is one example of the belief or the folkloric tale about the coffin and Vespasian, and the fact is that this was probably where ben Zakai met some of the survivors that ended up being the formal basis of rabbinic Judaism. About 130 years later, about 200 CE, following the loss of many Jewish teachers in the failed Great Revolt and Bar Kokhba rebellions, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince, decided to collect and record the oral law of the rabbis by codifying it into 63 tractates, which would be called the Mishnah. It is considered the first work of rabbinic Judaism. And the rabbis whose views are cited in the Mishnah are known as Tanaim, and I used that term before, that's teachers. Okay. It consists of 6 Sedarim, orders, the same word that Seder, Passover Seder, comes from, order, which each contains 7 to 12 Masechtot. These are tractates, which are each divided in Mishnayot, verses. The 6 orders of the Mishnah, the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Number 1 is Zeraim, seeds, agricultural laws and prayers. Second is Moed, these are festivals, Jewish holidays, and Shabbat. Nashim, things having to do with women, marriage, and divorce. 4, Nezikim, damages, civil and criminal law. Kodashim, holy things, sacrificial rites, the temple, the dietary laws. And the 6th one is Tahorot, which is purities. Laws of purity and impurity. Later, the rabbinic commentaries on the Mishnah were compiled and are called the Gemara. Gemar in Hebrew means the finishing. They were added to their corresponding sections in the Mishnah and became together what they called Talmud. Today, however, the terms Gemara and Talmud are used generally, used interchangeably. Many people don't realize that there are 2 Talmuds in Judaism. The first is called Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, which was completed in approximately 400 of the Common Era by rabbis living in Palestine. And more than a century later, leading Babylonian rabbis compiled the Gemara and produced the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. And the Bavli is the authoritative one, and it is the Talmud that most rabbis use today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and learned more about your biblical heritage. Please share this lesson with other people and visit my webpage at biblicalheritage.org for other lessons. If you'd like me to address a specific topic in future lessons, please email me. The link is on my webpage. May the Lord bless and protect you. Shalom, my friends.